Stephen began his career initially as in editorial. So he started out working as an assistant on films like Nanny McPhee, The Last King of Scotland, and Nowhere Boy. Then he went on to start editing in his own right on Black Mirror, Mrs. Wilson, and the BAFTA-nominated feature film Northern Soul. But it was when Stephen was editing on his Dark Materials for HBO when the production company Bad Wolf asked him to co-produce Series 1, and then he went on to become producer for Series 2 and 3. From there, I'm pretty sure I'm right in saying Stephen handed back his Avid subscription, and then he went on to produce Dope Girls for the BBC, and then 2 episodes of the new series of A Thousand Blows, which has just come out on Disney Plus too. But we are here today to talk about Industry Season 4. Hannah Davies in The Guardian has written a 5-star review and described it as truly twisted, top-tier television. And I couldn't agree more. So I'm delighted to open this masterclass series with such an amazing show that I've been a massive fan of since it came out way back in lockdown, and a brilliant producer as well. Big welcome to you and thank you for joining us, Stephen.
Thank you so much.
First of all, the reviews have been like uniformly amazing across the board. Um, so what can we expect from the rest of the series?
What can you expect? There's it goes off on quite a tangent. Let's say that. So it's kind of what's quite interesting. What's really interesting about the show, and the reason I gravitated towards it, is the way that Mickey and Conrad, who are the showrunners and writers, um, are constantly trying to best themselves and constantly trying to tweak and change and let the thing roll in any particular direction. So by the time to be absolutely honest, I think by the time you get to episode 8, this is a very different show than even episode 1 or the previous season. So that's really interesting to kind of see. And it's very, while we were making it, I recently rewatched seasons 2 and 3, which I didn't work, had nothing to do with whatsoever. And I was kind of watching every episode going with knowing where we end, thinking, I mean, I'm not even sure this is even, I'm not even sure it's the same show, it's the same name. But in that sense, it's really interesting in the best possible way. Like it is completely, I think, gets quite unexpected.
Are you still working on the show? Are you still delivering it at the moment?
Yeah. So like 99% of creative post is done. There's just a few things that came up yesterday. And we are delivering the last 2 episodes. So we're like 6 weeks behind broadcast. So it's a bit more like it's very breakneck. Let's say.
Okay, so you're right in the thick of it. So we really appreciate you stepping out of it and
No.
joining us for this talk.
Thank you. Thank you.
Um, so you mentioned their seasons 2 and 3. You weren't anything to do with. How was it? Quite a lot of people who left a question on their application forms wanted to know this. How was it about joining in series 4 into an existing show that was already moving?
I mean, tricky, to be totally honest, tricky in some ways. So you're inheriting all the kind of the ways of doing things that there has been up to that point.
Mm.
The ways, so you've got showrunners who come from a non-traditional filmmaking background who are now, directed a block of series 3, wrote all of it up to that point with, there were a few other writers around, but let's say wrote most of it. And then, but by series 4, they're now directing half of it. So they have come from very unconventional backgrounds in terms of filmmaking, which makes it just different. So they don't talk, in my experience, they don't talk like filmmakers like I've worked with in the past. So you have to find a way to kind of join that conversation and make it make sense for me and for them. And then there were other aspects, but there were other aspects that were clean slate-ish that I had to get ahead of. So the trading floor has disappeared at the end of series 3. So we had to build 2 key sets. So we with a new production designer who got hired like in my third week after I started. They weren't able to bring the previous production designer back. And so he and I, in a sense, were almost the 2 newest people at the head, if you know what I mean, because the execs were the same, the writers were obviously the same, and the cast were the same. And then the other aspect of it was trying to get all the new casting in and trying to do the biggest challenge, I guess, is trying to do all of that, especially with the new cast, because there's lots and lots of new cast, and they're higher profile cast than they'd really been before, aside from Kit, who joined in series 3. Trying to do all of that on exactly the same budget as series 1. It was
Okay.
challenging. So, So you had a standing set, just to be one aspect of this. There's a standing set, which is the trading floor that sat at the studio from series one to three, that they could go back to whenever they wanted and make the most use of through the series as they navigated those. We didn't have that. We had to build from scratch and find all the locations in Cardiff and Bristol that looked a little bit like London and Ghana and New York and wherever else. I forget where we go. Germany. Yeah.
So a lot of people will be quite surprised to hear that Cardiff and Bristol play so heavily in it. But how much percentage is shot in London? How much percentage is shot elsewhere?
So off the top of my head, if I just remember quickly, it's hold on, sorry, 20-week shoot. Uh, we only shot 2 days in London, which we
Mhm.
did in the first 3 weeks, and for various reasons couldn't go back to London. And then it was, I would estimate about a third, under half for sure, probably somewhere over a third shot at the studio in our two main sets, one of which is the tender office that you'll have seen, and one of which is a new location that you come to in series in episode three. And then in the end, out of all that location stuff, oh, I forgot the maths, Bristol was 7 days, 7 days out of 20 weeks, 2 days in London, the rest is Cardiff, and 2 days in South Africa.
Okay.
Completely breakneck. I mean, I can't overemphasize that.
Okay. Because it does it does an amazing job of making it look like it's all happening in London. And like you mentioned there, Simon Rogers, I think, was production
Yes.
designer. Absolutely brilliant work. I think costume, locations, makeup, lighting is
Amazing.
fantastic. Cut is great. It's just great work across the board. And I'm not sure of the ratio of people that were returning from series three and to the new team, but and apologies if I've missed anyone on the list there. But what's your involvement in assembling that team? Because everybody is absolutely doing top tier work on it.
So, um, so I hired 2 out of 4 DPs.
Mhm.
There were 2 new DPs came on. There's a DP called Fede Cheska who had shot on series two and three, who came back to do blocks one and four. I hired the 2 middle DPs who were with our 2 new directors, Michelle Saville and Luke Snellen. And the ADs, some of the ADs returned. There was a couple of new ADs. An awful lot of it was returning crew, in fairness. Um, I think Simon was I think the only headed, no, apart from the editors, Simon was the only other head of department who was new. And the art department were maybe 50, 60% new. So there was a lot of kind of familiarity. That was quite tricky, and honestly, that was sometimes quite tricky to navigate, kind of familiarity amongst people, conversations amongst people that then I have to kind of integrate into and work out which things to really get involved in and which ones to kind of let roll. Quite a young crew as well, young Cardiff crew, and I mean, I would estimate 80%. I mean, at least 80% maybe local Cardiff to Cardiff, and quite young, and people who had kind of of whom had grown up through the show. Let's say on series two and three, for example. I think some of whom might have been on series one.
And what about managing upwards then? Actually, no. Let me stay on that. When you're interviewing for people, when people are coming on board, what is it that what is it that you want to hear from people in the interview room? What's encouraging for you, or what puts you off?
Ooh, that's a tough one. I mean, in truth, so myself and Kate Crowther, the exec, and Flynn McDonnell, who was the other producer, who had kind of come from the writers' room, and had been on series three. She works for Bad Wolf. The three of us would do the um, first stage of interviewing anyone, and then we would try to determine who we thought was worth the next stage. And then the next stage had to be with Mickey and Conrad. And sometimes it was Mickey and Conrad alone, and sometimes it was with me. So Mickey and Conrad, when they first met Simon Rogers, the production designer, that was with me. Um, in terms of determining, I mean, I don't know, what are we after? I mean, it really helped if they liked the show. It really helped if they understood the tone. It really helped. We didn't really talk about content because obviously one of the things about the show that makes it quite singular is the adult content, and the boundary stuff, the boundary pushing. That didn't actually really come up often in conversations, but it probably maybe should have done a little bit, but it never proved to be an issue. So I don't know. For me, I'm just looking for clarity, purpose, good sense of storytelling, and professionalism.
You mentioned there are some really challenging characters, some really challenging storylines about the show. From Monday's episode in particular, I have two questions in particular about Henry's father's suicide and how that was thought through. Um, what discussions do you have about that portrayal of his death? And is there any sort of support mechanism in place for mental health for the crew that are working on the project?
Yeah, so there's a lot of conversation about it. So the original version of yeah, just to speak freely, because for those who haven't seen the episode, so the original depiction of what young Henry sees happen to his father, or what his father does, was much more explicit and much more baroque. It's actually baroque is the best word for it at writing stage. It wasn't kind of didn't feel real, but it was explicit. And we, when myself and the execs read that, we thought, okay, I was thinking, one, how would you do this? I won't go into detail. And two, not sure the BBC are going to like this because they've got very, very strong, understandable views on compliance around suicidal ideation. HBO, interesting, is the difference between BBC and HBO. This doesn't, I don't, I mean, this is criticism of HBO whatsoever, but HBO have less of an issue with that stuff. They just want the creative sense of what it is we're trying to do. And obviously, one could shoot things a million different ways and then make your mind up later. But actually, what we did on this, which is not always the case, is what's in the final episode is exactly what we shot. We didn't shoot anything more than what you see. So once we'd kind of the BBC, we knew it was going to be an issue. The BBC came back, gave us a guideline, compliance guideline, Ofcom guideline on what is they deem acceptable. It was made quite clear, just even amongst ourselves, that this is a very, very serious thing to take on, and why we had to question very strongly if we wanted to do it at all and how to do it. And we talked it through in myriad different ways and end up coming up with basically a shot list of what it would be. And actually, on the day I was up there on the day that we shot What Young Henry Sees, um, we actually even shot less than we had storyboarded. And then in terms of the kind of support structure of how you approach it, it starts in various things. I had to, because the scene is written, is a young boy seeing it, which, to be clear, the side of the young boy watching and the side of what he sees are shot in two completely different locations. We went so far as we went up a hill, got a piece of timber framing and stuck it in front of the camera so it looked like you were looking through a window. There's two completely different locations. The young actor who played young Henry was just looking out at a garden. I had to speak to his parents ahead of that shoot. We had to send the script to them. I spoke to the parents about the scene, asked them to read it, asked them to be happy. This is around the point at which we were making an offer. And then kind of beyond, once that was fine, and it was, there was kind of the support um, for the boy as well. Um, there were then kind of conversations around, yeah, some mental health support for crew. There were trigger warnings written on the call sheets. There was a trigger warning at any production meeting where we discussed it. It was all like I felt quite good and grown up way to approach it.
Okay. And then in terms of other explicit elements of the series, what what was your budget for intimacy coordinators? Because
We went over
it's
it.
pretty
We went over the
rigorous.
intimacy, but we went well over intimacy budget. Um,
Okay.
I can't remember how many days were budgeted. Sarah Green was the intimacy coordinator, who was fantastic, who had done some work on series three, and her background is somewhat in dance and theatre, I think. And basically, what would happen is you'd read a draft. We might have discussed it. We would have discussed and outlined some of what was going to be depicted or what we thought was going to be depicted. Um, Once we got a first draft of it, we would then quite quickly discuss, okay, is this actually what we're going to do? And then the next thing was it's all, although there were some probably off the record chats between Mickey and Conrad and let's say some of our key cast, like Marisa and Kit, I suspect. I wasn't party to some of those. The first thing we would do is Sarah, the intimacy coordinator, would read the script. built up a spreadsheet of everything that could be conceived as of intimacy, down to a scene where a minor has her head on her father's shoulder, and we discussed whether or not that was deemed intimacy. And then she then would we would then have and then we did it block by block. But let's say in a given block, I'd have that list from Sarah, and then I would sit down with Mickey and Conrad, the showrunners, and Sarah, and talk through every single one of those scenes and what we thought was going to be expected from depiction, and then what was deemed not intimacy, what we could kind of strike out, what needed a conversation, a private conversation between Sarah and an actor, uh, before anything we go anywhere, and then also what needed rehearsal. So then we would, any remotely explicit scene, even less than remotely, 1 out of 5 in the explicit uh, scale would be rehearsed, and that rehearsal was very closed. It would go into a private room. It would it had I had to be there, or Flynn, the other producer, had to be there. One of us. The director was there. If the showrunners weren't directing, they weren't there. And then it was led by Sarah, intimacy coordinator, and then we'd go through every single action that was made part of the drama, and we that might take an hour, and that might take less. Um, and in a sense, it's Sarah who navigates the all the sensitivities of that. And then at the end of that, we come up with an agreed action in whatever detail. It might be quite detailed, and then that gets written up by Sarah into um a oh my God, my brain is just completely gone, into an agreement that then the actors have to sign, and we have to get that signed as long as they're happy before we shoot, and
Okay.
then on the day, closed set, very limited people allowed on the set, myself, camera person, director, boom op, cast, and everyone else. It would be very restricted monitors. The only people who could actually watch the monitors were key hair and makeup, script supervisor, and the AD would be in the room as well.
Okay.
So it was
Okay.
quite strict, and
Yeah.
I think went, quite well, I think.
Well, there's a lot in the show, and it's very it goes to places that a lot of other shows don't go.
Yeah.
But talking about the sort of negotiations, we had the great questions from Abafebi Adeya J, who said, "How did you find managing simultaneous relationships between the BBC and HBO? And were there any unexpected benefits to the international co-production?"
So what's actually quite strange about the show, having done Historic Materials, which was a true BBC HBO co-production, is the industry is an HBO show and a BBC acquisition. So BBC have, and this is just a statement of fact rather than judgment, they have no creative input. I think they had a little bit maybe on earlier seasons, but it's an acquisition for them. So the only things that come up from the BBC tend to be compliance. So that could be various things. That could be sexual or violent content, suicidal ideation, political depictions. We had to be quite careful about what was talked about in dialogue or depicted around politics. Um, but there was a whole thing about we depict in episode 2, Henry losing an election, a local election or whatever it is, constituency election, and we had to be careful to make sure, although actually he's depicted as a member of the Conservative Party, and there's also a new character who's a member of Reform. Um, we had to be careful what was said, and as long as there's no bias and no slander and all the rest of it. So that's the kind of BBC input. And then there are certain things like we had to change the name of episode 1 for the BBC. So it's called something different in America, which you could look up if you wish. And that's all to do with BBC compliance because it's a very edgy show for them. And I'm actually surprised genuinely that there isn't more coverage in the UK, negative coverage around it being a BBC show.
Mm.
I don't know why that is.
Well, it is quite interesting because if you look at the broadcast schedule, In the UK, it's given a post 11 o'clock screening time on a Monday night, and I think it was actually BBC Two when it started out. Now it's on BBC One. But for the US audience and HBO, it's that 9 p.m. It's that premium 9 p.m. Sunday night slot that was
It is
Succession
now,
was
yeah.
in, that Game of Thrones was in. Do you think that linear scheduling plays any part in the show's ability to attract an audience? Or do you think it would be, I mean, where else would you put it in the schedule if you could put it on the BBC?
Yeah, I think I don't, I mean, I genuinely don't know what the BBC think of all of that. But I think, yeah, you would probably attract fire if you put it on at 9 p.m. And that must be some of the thinking. And because it, well, historically, maybe I don't know if it's still the case, but certainly historically at Series 1 stage, it was for a younger audience. So a younger audience are going to watch an iPlayer, so it makes sense. Um, but they don't do very much promotion around it, and I think that is probably reasonably conscious.
Okay. I mean, this is a broad question. It's another question from one of the audience members, Liv Taylor. What was the biggest creative risk you took this series, if you can describe it? And maybe you can cover the first two episodes. But what were you nervous about the audience reaction?
I personally, I did not write the show, and I'm coming to the show late. I liked the show a lot before I worked on it. Uh, I personally, genuinely was very unsure what audience response would be because it is very different, and because I know where it goes by the end. And I think there's a kind of thematic stuff is already there in the first couple of episodes around the political sphere that becomes more prominent by the end of the season, which I'm not sure as to everyone's taste or will be. However, based on the reviews, because all the reviews are based on all the critics got all 8 episodes, so they saw everything. I mean, I'm assuming they watched them, but I did read a few reviews and think I'm not sure you've watched past episode 3. But there are some that definitely refer to stuff where I'm like, okay, you've seen the end, which it seems to have gone down really well. I mean, I think what's really, I think that I was thinking, what is it? What is it about the show? There's many answers to this. What many aspects? What is it about the show that clearly pulls people in, having read all these reviews coming through? And I read a review yesterday about episode 2, like reading subtext into scenes where I'm sitting thinking, is that absolutely, I'm not sure that was intended. And I think that that's partly what it is that the show is just full of subtext. It's packed full of subtext. Some of it's conscious and some of it isn't. A great deal of it is in the performances, and at least some of it is definitely in the writing, but some of it is just the fact that it's rich. It's a rich world that they've created, rich characters they've created that have been amplified by excellent actors, and then and the fact that it keeps changing its kind of sphere and its kind of horizons, so that just generates more um, room for ideas and more room for discussion. And also, sorry, on top of that, I think what's really interesting is the actors, although they talk a lot and they have many words to say, they're not often necessarily saying what they think, which I think leaves this gap for audiences to read into what scenes are about and what characters are about.
Has it been another question from Jarlin Severino? Is watching it? They say watching it in 2020 was a breath of fresh air. Did you have to fight and keep industry renewed? Was there ever? Do you know if it's been through that sort of process of just about scraping through to the next commission?
Yes, I think that the series 3 commission was somewhat unexpected, and the Series 4 commission came late, so that's part of the reason why it's been so mad fast, is that Series 4 got commissioned quite late in the game, and they're now waiting on Series 5 commission, which again has a very tough schedule. So yes, I think, just to be transparent about it, the ratings are not huge, but at all compared to most major shows, but it just seems to hit a point around some kind of discussion in culture somehow, some discussion in the press, and some discussion around, I don't know, the middle classes or something. I don't know what it is, but or definitely people who work in media for some reason. Because it's good, obviously, but it's not like a broad, huge smash hit. But it's very good at what it does, and it seems to have kind of maximized that.
Well, we've got a lot of discerning viewers in the room with us today
Exactly.
who
Very
are
intelligent,
who,
but sorry, very intelligent people like it. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Um, uh, Can I ask you about the you mentioned just coming back a second ago, you mentioned about the by-election result that came through. Was it the real Count Binface
Yes.
on the dais?
Yeah,
It
so we had
was
to
the
do
real
there's
Count
some really
Binface.
funny things that you end up having to do on this show. One of them was having to find Count Binface
Yeah,
and having to invoice Count Binface, having a whole agreement, having a whole agreement about what his fee was and what he was willing to do and how he wanted to manage his own brand. You know,
quite a diva.
and obviously an awful lot of this stuff, what's really also really interesting about the fact that it does well in the US, certainly critically, is the fact that so much of this stuff is so niche British. Like if you understand who Count Binface is, then I think it's a very, very funny moment in the sequence. It's brilliant. I love it. But I don't know how that plays for other people. I mean, there's various other things later on, maybe more so in the last few episodes, which are again, so what's really interesting, certainly from my point of view, is where genuine real world figures and real world, let's say, brands enter into our sphere, not just kind of the political parties.
Okay. Um, so you've given us some teasers there of things that we can look forward to coming around the corner. Can I ask you about your transition then now from editor to producer? Because
Sure.
that is weird, right? I
Yeah.
don't know anybody
Tell me
else
about
that's
it.
done that.
No.
But do you think it gives you, for want of a better phrase, some sort of different point of difference or sort of
Well,
special
if the answer
perception that others may
if the
not?
if the answer was no, then then what am I doing? I think yes. I think look. I think it gives me a view of the finish line. So I'd say at script stage, maybe even at outline stage, script stage, shooting definitely. I've got a strong instinct for what I think is worth getting, not worth getting, worth worrying about, not worth worrying about, and that f feeds into, I hope, different things. I think it feeds into how to tell a story effectively, how to get a good performance actually sometimes because I was so used to editing performance, how to manage weirdly, maybe perhaps it might sound how to manage actors. Um, I think my understanding of where performances go can be quite useful in dealing with actors full stop. Same with directors because I worked so closely in it, literally me and a director in a small room for years. And also maybe things like, and maybe this is a more recent experience on industry, things like choosing locations and how locations will tell a story and what's going to give you scale, what's going to give you production value. I think all comes from an instinct around what you actually need to tell the story at its best.
And Jarell Stewart, not sure if you hear Jarell, but he's asked the question of what changed most the way that you thought about your work when you moved from editor to producer, and is there anything that you wish you'd started doing a little bit earlier?
Oh God, sorry. What was the first one? What changed most?
So what changed most when you went? What was the biggest, I suppose, starkest change, the biggest difference between being the edit suite to being producer?
You're massively front facing as the producer, and you have to deal with everything and everyone at every moment. Whereas being an editor was more enclosed, more intimate, uh, more very much more private. This is a much more public facing role, which is not necessarily something I love in that sense. But it means that like I really understand heads of department because I was a head of department. So I think I think I'm able to talk to crew, cast, creatives generally in a way that comes from a place of understanding and having started in a different place. And obviously, I was also dealing with producers the whole time as well, so and studios as an editor. So, and I think a lot of the things I worked on just by pure coincidence ended up being quite kind of a lot of them anyway. There was no place to hide actually in a lot of the work I did as an editor, just purely by coincidence, just by dint of what those projects were. And so I suppose I was used to having very blunt, straight conversations with whoever I was working with, and so I've probably carried that through because I have to do more of that now.
So is that bluntness, is that directness, is that the best way to conduct like constructive feedback, or what's a good way to give it, and what's a good way to receive it?
I think it's you just I genuinely transparency has to be the key to absolutely everything, and I think that productions become unstuck and individuals on productions become unstuck the moment they're not transparent, and it's a huge problem when you can feel or obviously see that a person or a group of people are not being transparent, not being upfront, not being straightforward, and not listening. Uh, yeah, transparency.
Okay. Is that the same for the person receiving the issue? We've got a lot of people who work on the crew here. In if they're listening out for feedback, what should they be hearing? What should they be
Uh,
taking note of?
that's a very, I don't know, quite know how to answer that. I think, sorry, and I don't, I'm slightly positing myself as like the judge or something. That's not what I'm saying. That's not what I'm saying. I guess what I'm saying is that I feel that all conversations in the making of film and TV should be very transparent, very straight, very direct, and quite simple. And
Okay.
there might be very complicated issues, by the way, like really complicated issues, and you have to navigate those step by step. But I don't see a point in game playing, which is something that I have encountered on many occasions, including as an editor. And it's something I don't really like as a kind of approach, and I think you get unstuck. So, and I genuinely think that applies to any member of crew at any level. And obviously, sorry, on top of that, just to be really clear in terms of tone, this has to be all of this has to be done incredibly respectfully and empathetically. Just to be really clear, that is also of equal importance.
Really good advice. We're speaking about another project that you worked on that has just come out. Then we have to address Thousand Blows Series Two. Can you tell us a little bit about your involvement in that? Because I think it's about. I think you did it before you even started on industry. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think I can see Sarah Granville here. I think we shot. Oh God, when did we shoot? Like 2.5 years ago. I can't even remember. 2023. I think I joined early 2023, and it was series two. They shot two series back to back, and
Mhm.
I just did the opening block of series two, so it was kind of like operating within a unit, and I was operating from my point of view, and I was operating. It was weird because although it was two series back to back, it kind of felt like a series one because everything was still working itself out. But it was really good. It was 15 minutes from my house. That was probably the big bonus. And production values are amazing. The set was amazing. Cast are amazing. Like I think there's an extent to which that kind of show at that kind of production level is less common now. And I think that might have been one of the last ones apart from the mega budgets.
It's I've had lucky enough to get a tour of the set. It's absolutely exceptional. The studio in Mortlake. Any hint, any word of a season three being commissioned yet?
There are discussions, I believe. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, and I know Sarah Granville. I can see Sarah's here, who worked on the show as well, a script editor, I think.
Yeah.
Hi, Sarah. Hopefully it will come back for you too. What about shows that are coming up? What are you reading at the moment? What scripts are being sent to you? What sort of, what sort of, what piques your interest when a script does land with you from your agent?
She's
And we should
probably
say you're with independent talent, right? So
yes, no, with
everyone's
independent.
got a script.
I'll be totally honest. I haven't been reading very much.
Okay.
So I've been working very hard. I shouldn't there's a couple of conversations I'm having that I shouldn't mention, which are about potential projects,
Okay.
which have kind of come through my own network, but they're very loosey goosey to be honest. I don't actually know, I really don't know what I'm doing next. So yeah, but what do I look for? Uh,
Hmm.
I was trying to think about that because that's really, I think the reason I often struggle with that question is because I've got quite a broad taste, and my taste, I think, is usually based around what I deem quality, and quality is subjective. But I think that the things I find the most interesting are character rich. I love dense stuff, and room for performance, room for a sense of cinema, which is not often the case on TV, and a lack of cliche. Those are probably the things that I respond to the most strongly.
Okay, so hopefully, when you finish this delivery system for the end of this series, you'll be picking up for more scripts to shoot later this year.
That would be nice, wouldn't it? It would be nice to
Okay,
replace.
All right. Well, fingers crossed for those.
Thank you.
If you've got a question that you want to ask, please stick it in the chat box because we're generally going to come to your questions. So you're going to make up the second half of the talk today. So please start typing, tapping away. Um, uh, if you are interested, we've got any new entrants on here. If you're interested, we're doing a CV and cover email workshop this Friday lunchtime. Steph's going to drop a link into the comments box below as well, just in case that's of interest to you. And while we wait for some of those questions to come in, I have got some quick fire questions. I know you're really good. I did a pub quiz with you once, the film quiz. I can't remember the name of it.
I
I
think we
think we're going
won.
to. Yes, well, without you, I think we would have come last, certainly. So I'm going to grill you on a very quick fire quiz. So I've got a few questions for you. Um, so, what's the first film you remember seeing at the cinema?
The Jungle Book.
What's the greatest performance you've ever seen?
So uh, I would have to think musically, like is where my brain goes rather than like an actor, so to speak. Uh, Actor-wise, Ruth Wilson on His Dark Materials and Mrs. Wilson, who's just extraordinary. And musically, I saw a great gig by King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard a few months ago at the Royal Albert Hall, which was amazing.
Excellent. Okay, all right. Best crew gift you've ever seen or ever
Um,
given?
we got a beautiful little alethiometer at the end of His Dark Materials 3, which was incredible, like small, like beautifully conceived, made alethiometer.
You'd have to describe that again. I didn't pick that up. What was it?
I'd have to find it. At the center of His Dark Materials in the story is a device that Lyra, the main character, reads, which is a kind of like some kind of weirdy tarot-y machine thing. And we got given some members of the crew got given a replica.
Okay, all right. Very good. Maybe you can grab it later on if we have time. Guilty pleasure to watch.
I don't feel guilty about it, but Naked Gun, Airplane, Top Secret.
Okay, that's not guilty at all. You picked a very cool one there. Okay, country or location that you most like to film in?
Ireland.
Anywhere in particular in Ireland?
Anywhere in Ireland, that'd just be quite nice to see the green grass of home.
Okay, all right. If you weren't a producer or an editor, what role would you see yourself doing?
In film and TV.
You sure? Yeah.
um, maybe a DP.
Okay. Okay, right in the heart of the action. Okay. Who do you think is going to be the next big thing?
I worked with a director on Industry Block 2, so episodes 3 and 4, called Michelle Saville, who I thought was amazing and I think did the best work on the season by a million miles. Um,
Michelle Saville.
yeah, she's amazing.
Okay, want to keep an eye out for. And what is the best film or TV show ever made
From my personal taste,
from your personal taste?
uh, Rosemary's Baby, Blue Velvet, Elephant Man.
Okay, all right,
Profound.
very good, very good, very very high quality. The three there. Okay, so we've got a couple of questions in. So Adrian DeBar has asked, "What do you think audiences want to see now, in 1 year, and in 5 years' time?" So people keep getting your questions in.
I don't know really, I'll be honest, but I assume they want to see good. I assume they want to see quality. I mean, I despair slightly at the prevalence of fantasy and having worked on a huge fantasy show. But I hope that people want to see real world interesting things. But I also understand that they might not want to be reminded of the current political situation.
Okay. What key things would you say that big studios like HBO look for new young showrunners and writers that help Mickey and Conrad's journey into getting commissioned? That's from Jude.
I think I obviously wasn't part of that. I suspect it was probably to do with the specificity of what they were writing about and the specificity of the world, which, as they've talked about many times in interviews, they had worked in the city, but only briefly. And I think it was more to do with just that they had a sense of the pulse of that kind of world. And I heard recently from someone, I forget whom, maybe a commissioner, that apparently the thing that everyone wants, all broadcasters want, is a workplace drama. Apparently that's the thing. So everyone wants workplace dramas. Uh, I'm not certain why, but I mean, that could be anything, right? So yeah, write some workplace dramas.
Workplace dramas. Okay. Is that all like a single location thing, cost thing, do you think? Or
It might be. I was trying to dissect it myself with whoever told me. Is it something to do with kind of singular world relatable experience? Is that what it's to do with maybe? Like everyone's had this type of experience, even if you don't know the world, and being introduced into a singular world, whether it be, Line of Duty or Mad Men or whatever, Wire. These are singular, very kind of focused worlds, maybe. Mhm.
okay, so we're going to be looking out for in the next year, in the next 18 months, we're going to be looking out for workplace dramas that come
Workplace
through.
dramas, workplace dramas.
Okay. Sarah's asking, what are the perks of being a producer? And have you made a cameo in industry? Can you reveal? Do we have an exclusive?
Actually, I don't know. I was going to be at one point, myself and Simon Rogers were potentially going to be on the board of Tender in a scene at the end of the season, but it just didn't happen, which is a shame. Well, not for me. And perks. I mean, it's obviously a pleasure to work with people who are operating at the height of their game, and that doesn't happen all the time. And this show definitely happens.
Well, speaking of the top of the game, Yasmin has asked, what makes a good director and what was Michelle doing that made her so impressive to you?
Um, she 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 had an incredibly strong sense of story logic. So if she was looking at a scene, I wasn't necessarily having every single conversation with her that made up her process, not by any means. She had a very involved process with her DP, who she'd worked with before. She's meticulous in planning. I think she was just like in an incredibly focused um, macro and micro way, working through the logic of what everything meant in a scene, which is kind of unbelievable because I actually don't think there's lots of directors who just don't do that. And they, even for really good directors, I think, or even there's lots of really good directors who go onto set or have an idea before they go onto set, which is, okay, I'm going to set the tone, I'm going to get to know people and let people perform, which is sometimes quite right. Um, but might not have an answer for every question. And I think her thing was, which is partly her own, just her own, how she prepares, I think. She would have had an answer to everything, every any possible question, and that was because she had thought through everything on every syllable, which was amazing.
Yeah. As a producer, this is a question coming in from Thomas. As a producer, when a project is becoming very difficult or is hit an unexpected obstacle, um, what do you do to keep on top of it? And what kind of mindset do you need to adopt to keep the program and yourself on track?
Sorry, what was the first part of the question? I'm really sorry.
When you've hit an obstacle on a
Yeah,
show, what do you do to keep on top of it? Let's say something unexpected comes up, and what kind of mindset do you have to have as a producer?
I think it's probably the answer is the same for all of it. I think, which is just to remain calm and rational. And I think that, lots of things come up on shoots and lots of things come up all the way through things, I mean, finance, budget, issues with cast, issues with crew, all sorts of locations dropping out, all sorts of stuff that can feel seismic at the time, but isn't necessarily seismic because there's always a way out of it. And I think that you just try to keep one's eye on how to navigate things in a straightforward way and try to reach a solution that actually will benefit the show. Keep that in mind rather than going, oh, I wish we had whatever. We had, for example, on industry, to be honest, a major role or a major new role, an actor dropped out on us a few weeks before the shoot, which was a real shame. And we were definitely being kind of played. And so we had to do the last minute piece of quite major casting. Um, and yeah, you just had to say, well, this is what the issue is, and now we have to solve it quite quickly. So with everyone's effort, particularly the casting director, we were able to get through quite quickly.
Does it feel sometimes like when there's a mate, like, do you look back now on the series? I know it's a little while ago, but do you look back now on producing the series and think that appeared to be at the time a major problem that might have brought the whole house of cards down, but actually 24 hours later, it was a completely different outlook?
But so I maybe I slightly naively look at most issues in that way as not being something that's going to bring the house down because it's the thing is still running. That maybe if I try to be very objective and look at that I think that's a tendency in me that might sometimes look like I don't care that much. I'm being hypercritical of myself. I don't think that is the case. I think that it's because I know that it's not going to be the end of the world. And yes, there might be pressure on to find the solution, but we'll do something and we just have to make sure it's good and we just have to make sure we've got wriggle room to if it doesn't work out.
Okay, good advice. Josh was asking, what would you say is usually the right first point of contact for a new TV script? Is it try to get an agent or try to find its way to someone like you?
Um, probably an agent. Probably an
Yeah.
agent, which, is a whole other kind of murky world, but probably an agent. Because
Okay.
because a production company won't unless you're talking to an individual and in a very professional way, or you've got a kind of connection that you can get something to someone, production companies simply won't look at scripts unless they're coming via an agent, really, unless it's a historic relationship or something.
I can recommend checking out Philip Shelley and the Channel 4 writer scheme. Is a really, really good one for that one, Joshua. Tim's asking, would you have advice for freelance script coordinator looking to get into HETV? Um, yeah, the script department is quite a difficult one to sort of understand how the access points work with that.
Yeah.
Um, but where would you normally hire a script coordinator from? Would they have to have done it before? Would you be looking for somebody to come up through a certain particular pathway in the production office, perhaps?
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, so I guess production potentially to begin with, it is quite specific. I mean, I know a script editor who came from an agency background, so had relationships with writers. That was one quite an individual case, but for the most part, actually, I know a couple that came from agency background. Now I think about it. But I wouldn't say that that was the gold standard of way to do it. I think, like anything, it's probably like even with myself starting off in the roles that I was doing, I think it's somehow about, trying to find exposure for yourself in a professional workplace and kind of go from there. Because
Okay.
that's how you get to know people and how you start to understand how things work. And I mean, I've been doing this a while, and there's certain things I don't 100% know how they work, because it's a bit of a mystery. But most of it is just getting in there.
This comes into, well, I think as he's asking the question as well of like moving between fields within production or within. I think as he's talking about moving from production, yeah, from an accounting background into long-term producing. Sorry, from an accounting background into producing or into production world. Do you have anybody? Was there anybody in through the system at maybe a Bad Wolf in Wales that had come in maybe as one thing and maybe moved into a different area? Can you remember from the His Dark Materials or from industry?
Oh gosh. Well, apart from myself. Um, oh gosh. I'm not sure. I think yeah, I'm not certain. I think honestly the best advice I think I could give it is to, make I think it's a tricky thing, when you're thinking about changing lanes, is at what point you start communicating that and how you communicate it. Um, because ambition can be misunderstood and ambition can be a dirty word. Uh, and I think one has to be quite careful in how one navigates because what I would say, which might not sound like a wonderful statement, is that I do think that the industry as a whole, and I was thinking I've been working now 22 or 23 years in different capacities, and the industry does lack imagination, and that's obvious in many aspects, including lack of diversity, and diversity in all aspects. But I think that it lacks imagination in understanding and thinking. And of course, I'm saying this because it's my own experience, but I did think it anyway, which was understanding that people are capable of changing lanes and furrowing new paths. You know,
Okay.
I mean that in a positive way.
Yeah, well, there are if you are moving and you are switching, I think there are options with bursaries from Screen
Yes.
Skills that would help you train and retrain into different areas. So it might be worth checking out some of those. Yasmin's also got another question, slightly ties into a question that came online from Emily, which is if you could change something about the TV industry, what would it be? And Emily's question was, what are producers concerned about in this current climate? So that might be the same things. But what are producers from conversations that you're having with your colleagues? What are producers most worried about at the moment?
Shrinking budgets.
Hmm.
I don't think that just means selfishly their pay packets. I think it genuinely means an ability um, to put things on screen that work. And obviously, the paradigm has changed massively in the last 10 years. Very much. I have vivid memories of TV, working on TV that was microscopic budgets compared to industry, and industry is not even a very that big a budget, to be honest. Um, but I think, yeah, budget.
Are you seeing certain bands sort of disappear, or a reduction of bands two or three?
What I'm hearing is that everything's going into band two, and like
Yeah.
we're in this industry is factually band three, but not in reality. It's band two, basically, upper band two.
Okay. Question here: what advice would you give somebody wanting to get into editing?
I mean, same as anything, like try to get into an environment that where editors, cutting rooms are accessible. And I think at first, I mean, obviously I know a lot of people who work in it. Uh, I think at first, so I became a trainee after being a runner, and the way I got a trainee job was just through getting to know people who were working in that world, and eventually it paid off as a recommend. I got a recommendation to go for an interview for Nanny McPhee, and I got the job. But that was because I was willing to be flexible for various reasons to take that job. And but I didn't get hired for that job because I was a creative powerhouse. I got hired because I was easy to get on with and I would do what I was told. And so it's just about I don't think you have to kind of I don't think I'm sure this counts for everything. I think I don't think it's about like turning up with like all the best ideas on day one. It's just like at first it's about relationships. To be honest, it continues to be about relationships anyway. So I think your first port of call has to be professionalism, relationships, listening when you're a junior, and always listening. I don't know, that's a bit of a ramble.
No, it's very good. Very solid advice. Persistence as well, I suppose.
Yes.
And I think we'll end up on this question from Alexander. What are you most hopeful for in the immediate future within the UK TV and film industry?
Oh. Um, ooh. It would be nice to not have TV that was getting homogenized into an American form. And I think that the Americans are amazing at making drama, amazing at making films because they have an understand. This is such a generalization. They, the whole country, have an understanding of how to tell a story that is different from, let's say, a British understanding. And a British understanding probably is based on a history of theatre and what have you. And I'd love for more British drama to be able to navigate genre in a way that Americans just seem to do so easily and not constantly, this sounds terrible, it's not constantly making everything social realist. Does it all have to be social realism, or can it have a little bit more imagination? That said, long live the BBC.
Yeah, I echo that. I completely agree. Stephen, thank you very much. It's been a fantastic hour, and I really appreciate you giving everybody your
Thank
time and
you.
your wisdom and experience. Season four is incredible so far. Is absolutely brilliant. Can't wait to see where it's going to go next. And we hopefully maybe we get to do this again on another occasion. Maybe series five, maybe something else.
Maybe.
But I'm sure everyone will show their love in the chat box just to say thank you so much. But from behalf of me and the call sheet, thank you so much.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you, everyone. Thanks very much.
Brilliant.
Bye.
Thanks all. Bye, Stephen. Thank you so much.